go around the room real quick, get everyone introduced. Raquel. Whoa, hey, how's it going?
It's going.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am Raquel Landefeld, and I started a WordPress agency many moons ago and now have become the event coordinator for Elegant Themes. So that's what I do with WordPress.
Nice. Good to have you on.
Oh, and there's that little thing you do called WordCamp Phoenix.
Oh yeah, and I'm an organizer of the WordCamps.
No big deal. It's one of the biggest ones. NBD. And you're also on the WordCamp US committee. So, okay. Yeah, anyway, I just thought I'd remember all that stuff. You're like, that's all I do.
They need to do your intro next time. All right, we'll make that happen.
Let me help. And who am I? Who are any of us? I'm Faye Reed. I make WordPress, teach WordPress, preach WordPress. I'm hopefully going to be a WordCamp organizer soon if it gets approved. I'm super excited. I hope it does.
Lead?
No. No. Sorry. Yeah, we'll see. I'll announce it when it happens. But if I don't have to leave my own town, I'm all for it.
Nice. Cosper, how about you?
Hey everybody, Jason Cosper, aka Fat Mullenweg, back up in the building. Just happy to be here. Happy to talk about WordPress with you today.
Awesome. Good to have you on. I'm Jason Tucker. You can find me over at Jason Tucker on Twitter. My website is jasontucker.blog, and I do this show as well as another show, WPWab. Feel free to go take a look at that. We'll be recording next week. So definitely on Thursday, we'll be talking a little bit about social media marketing and all sorts of fun stuff like that. So feel free to go take a look at that. Jason Cosper, you've literally ruined me for the day after looking at this amazing looking Bcaster microphone. And I darn you. During the pre-show, we talk about some stuff and then we start shooting some different links to each other. And I'm looking at this thing going, yeah, that's pretty cool. So definitely go take a look at the Bcaster. It is pretty awesome.
Not a sponsor. Not
a sponsor at all.
Not an ad.
Not an ad, but no, I'm looking at this right now and I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is my next microphone. So it's definitely your next microphone. I'm not going to steal your thunder.
No, please steal away.
Yeah,
I know, right? There's more than one of those. Just
there are. There's
you can both have one.
Kinds.
We're both named Jason and we can both have the same microphone. It's fine.
Yeah, single white female that ish.
Right. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about like community, but not just community in the sense of just WordPress itself, but rather all the different like sub communities that are in here that are a part of the WordPress overall community or even just the web community. But different kind of small little things that have broken off that are either based on products or services or ways of life or whatever.
Same but different. That's what we should call this.
Same but different. Oh my gosh.
Same but different.
Yep. So how should we approach this one, Say?
Well, as you can see, I am adorning myself with every like this is only some of the Wapoos. I just found a bag of Wapoos, so I'm just putting all the Wapoos on. The Wapoo community is definitely a community within a community. There's a whole group of people who are like, I don't know if I'd use the word obsessed, but let's say obsessed with Wapoo. And so that's one of the communities out there that if you were, just going to a WordCamp even, or if just a user of WordPress, you wouldn't even know that exists, right? Like, and when people talk, like, you wouldn't even know that was something you could do, like that you could go, like, get your Wapoo on.
Right.
So anyway, that's an example. This is a different example of that, but a great example of that is, for example, what Raquel does, or the company that she works for, that has an entire world. Doesn't it even have a name? Like the Divi
Life.
Divi Nation.
Divi Life, yeah.
Divi Nation. Yeah,
Divi Nation. That's what it is.
I just remember a couple years back going to WordCamp OC and sitting there and then watching these like It was like, I don't know if you guys have been to Disneyland recently or in the last couple of years, but there's been this whole like Disney gangs type of thing where everybody shows up with like these jackets and it looks like a gang jacket and it has like, you know, it'll have like a Cinderella on the back of it or whatever.
Maybe like say a Letterman's jacket and not a gang
No,
jacket?
it's a gang jacket. It's literally a gang jacket. Yeah. So
based on like the motorcycle colors, right?
Yeah.
Like a motorcycle.
Oh, I'm thinking like a
community
Bato
club.
game. I'm like, what?
Yeah, it's like a community club type of thing instead of a motorcycle club. But it was funny because we're sitting there and all of a sudden like all these like Divi people show up. We're like, cool. Like what's this?
I believe if you're wearing a motorcycle jacket or any sort of club jacket, it's called rolling up. If you roll up with multiple, like that's what it's called. It's not called coming up or anything. You roll up if you've all got the same jacket on.
Yep.
That's hilarious.
But Divi shows up and they start, you know, they had their own events that they were doing there and they had selfie things that were going on and they all started going to different, you know, different rooms to kind of support their people that were speaking. And it was just the coolest thing to see that. And it's neat to see that, you know, Raquel, who's like essentially super community person, is involved in that sort of thing. So I don't know what you're going to bring to the table. I think they already have everything, Raquel, but you know it's icing on the cake, I guess.
All
you know?
the shiz to the table. What are you even saying? She's going to level up their game something.
Oh, let me tell you what we're gonna do. No, I was at that camp too, and I remember seeing them. I likened it to like herds of animals, because they were all together and they were all wearing purple shirts, and I'm like, who's this? And I think it was Brandon Dove. Was like, oh, that's Divi. I'm like, who? Back then, because I had no idea, but yeah, no, it was actually just kind of contagious to watch them. Like, yeah, it was definitely a subset of our community, of the WordPress community. But what I'm bringing to the table, Jason, is planning their first DiviCon.
Ooh.
Yeah. Yes.
That's
When's
fun.
that? I want to know when that is.
Not set in stone, but hopefully 2020.
Nice.
Hold on. I'm like, next year. That's next year. I really have a hard time with grasping the 2020 being next year thing. Like I'm like, that's in like 5 years for sure. Not next year, but it is.
Yeah, but the community is awesome, and since I already have lots of experience with wrangling our WordPress communities, it just makes sense. I'm very happy.
That's exciting. Divi also has, in addition to a physical presence where they kind of gang up or whatever, or are a sub community within the community. They have an extensive amount of websites that are Divi focused, and if you landed on those sites, you would not necessarily realize that there is that it's kind of built on something else. You know, it's Divi. WordPress is there, but it really has its own focus, its own set of, like, WordPress community has all of these different websites and whatnot, and Divi has its own subset of those things. It's got all sorts of different add-ons and extensions that third parties are doing in addition to the main thing, which, I think the fact that the WordPress community is its own strong ecosystem, but that it also is capable of supporting all of these sub ecosystems within that, is one of the hugest strengths. Like, it really demonstrates the strengths anyway of the community in terms of just how much is out there.
Well,
absolutely. I was going to say, also, outside of just the Divi community, we have a few others that are fairly large. One that's been around for quite some time is the Genesis community. And everything around that. I mean, some of the first like WordPress blogs that were dedicated to a niche outside of just WordPress that I remember reading were Bill Erickson and Carrie Dill's like Genesis related stuff. Both great resources, not only for WordPress, but if you get locked into the Genesis community,
which you will if you use it. It's locked.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Then there's also the WooCommerce community, which has absolutely become its own thing, and in its own right. It's like
WooCon got its own conference.
Yeah, WooCon.
Absolutely.
WooCon.
They have their own chartered meetups as well.
Yeah,
for WooCommerce.
there are tracks at WordCamps that are all WooCommerce based. So, you know, an actual like dedication to having an individual like, you know, room set up for just WooCommerce talks. That's a pretty big chunk of the community right there. I was just at WordCamp Santa Clarita last weekend, and they had an entire track on Saturday set up and dedicated to WooCommerce related talks. Like
that's very common now at WordCamps.
Absolutely.
We had that at Phoenix too. And sponsors actually want to, certain like hosts that we know that love WooCommerce, they want to sponsor just that track. So it's like a good way to bring in revenue for WordCamps, since, you know, it's volunteer based, all that.
Yeah, well, I mean, WooCommerce really has, just like Divi and Genesis, has its own, so it's got its own like extensions library. It's got its own, all these third-party add-ons. It's got a robust extension add-on. It's always so weird. You have the plugins, the plugins for the plugins, the meta plugins. Like, what do you guys call them? Add-ons, extensions? What does everyone call them? Like, just in their day-to-day, like, what do you call them?
Add-ons and extensions are kind of interchangeable for me. I sort of go to wherever the person is more comfortable, but they're kind of, it's interchangeable at this point, I feel like.
Well, anyway, they have a giant, robust add-on / extension community, which is actually interesting because I think sometimes people can be confused. Well, I know people can be confused with which parts are WooCommerce and where those are coming from, even differentiating between the fact that this is, even though it's like for WooCommerce, it's not by WooCommerce. So there's this other, I think that's probably an issue that comes up with Divi also. People are like, oh, this is yours, right? Like there's certain websites like Divi Spaces or whatever that you're like, oh, that's Divi, so it's Divi. And it's not Divi, it's someone else, you know, creating another ecosystem around Divi. So there's definitely the opportunity for confusion there amongst, you know, who's got what. And I think with Genesis and StudioPress, that's actually still very confusing.
Now, especially since they're owned, it's all a WP Engine product. So
right.
Which is next level.
And then so they have, WP Engine has free Genesis for all of its customers. So that's really even merging blending the line between Genesis and I was like StudioPress, Genesis, I can't, like blending the line between Genesis and WordPress, because WP Engine is offering it as just like another thing. So if someone comes on and is a WP Engine customer, they don't even really need to or have the opportunity to differentiate between what those things are. So I think that's, it can definitely produce some user confusion if you're not savvy, or even if you are savvy.
Well, it's like the blessing versus the sanctioned versus the, it depends on how it's set up, I guess. And I think all of these things, we're an open source community, which means we can fork everything and we can do all the things we want with whatever it is that we want.
Fork it all.
When we look at it and go, I want to do it this way, I'm going to go run off and do this, which was pretty interesting with, like, I don't know if you've ever looked at WP Campus, but Rachel Cherry has been doing amazing work with higher learning stuff with that. That's not even technology based, like it's more like, higher learning part of it, applying technology to that. So there's plenty of those sorts of things. I mean, even like YostCon, where they're being able to do like a bunch of SEOs show up and they all start talking about SEO stuff. So there's a whole bunch of these different ones that are out there, and you can just kind of, find the thing that works for you and then run with it. I did want to mention before regarding what we were talking about with Genesis is, I think with Genesis, it's pretty smart because no one's going to go and like rally around a web host. Like no one's like, yay, I use this web host.
That is so not true.
And the web host would really like it if people would start rallying around them. But
they try. I think I have a SiteGround pin here somewhere.
Dude, I have SiteGround shoes.
I gotta.
but
Flywheel wants you to do that.
But you know what I mean? So like you have to
this
find,
t-shirt too.
I think it's smart for them to find those companies that are already have that community and then kind of, you know, say, hey, we'll help you out with some other stuff that kind of ties in with this. So yeah, smart stuff. We've seen plenty of those that happen.
Another thing, or another example of this is with gravity forms. And this was actually scandalous a couple years back. And now it's just kind of settled, where there was the, there's gravity perks, right, that do a whole bunch of things. And that's not from the same people who offer gravity forms. It's a different company. And then I believe, who are the people who did the was it gravity forms, where they like stripped the license and then just copied everything and said, here's the free version? I'm pretty sure it was gravity forms.
Oh yeah, I remember.
And they were like, here's the free version of it. We'll call it something else. I don't want to say the name because I think I'm confusing two companies.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
And they were basically like, you can't sell this program or this software because it's open source. So that means we can take it, and as long as we're using it within the license, we can reissue it to you. And so they were actually, I think they're still doing it, reissuing that plugin.
Yeah.
As they're basically repurposing it. So if you go to that plugin first, you would never even know that it was a current fork of gravity forms. That's
right.
Confusing.
I think it's interesting around these communities. So like Genesis, I've worked with WordPress for a little over 13 years now. I have never actually laid hands or built a Genesis site. Part of it is just because, I'm in my own way. Like, it wasn't necessarily ever a community that appealed to me. I saw what they were doing, but also partially, like, if I can be straight up, like, amongst friends and everybody watching, the Genesis community, like, all those resources were there and it was great, but it was also a little overwhelming. It was,
I mean, they had a lot of hooks and stuff that was just like, it felt like this layer on top of a layer. And I was like, well, if I'm, going to do all this stuff, why not just do it in the core? So they were like, here's easy hooks that are pre-made, but it was definitely Genesis was with designers. So it was making easier way. And this was, ways back, making it easier for designers to do custom stuff within themes. And so without having to get into PHP and all of that stuff. So it was really answering a need. Now it just really feels to me like a layer on top of WordPress that I personally have never really viewed as necessary. I usually view it as like kind of like, just extra stuff. Because then you have to have your Genesis theme and then your additional theme and then, all the stuff that works specifically for Genesis. And I'm just like, that's just too much stuff to update, honestly. There's too many licenses. Like, who wants that stack? Like, I think that is more for designers and maybe some devs who are managing and continually managing and maybe even hosting and holding the licenses for those clients. Because most clients are not going to be able to have that kind of double, triple license process. So now if they're with WP Engine, they don't have to have that. So WP Engine really removed that. But I actually think I said on this program when WP Engine bought StudioPress that it seemed to me that was kind of an insurance policy for WP Engine, that if something happened to WordPress, they could build out that entity as its own thing. They could basically fork WordPress into Genesis as a, when you're a big business with venture capital and all of that, like everyone's like, you're building this business on what now? An open source that could get 10 cow. But I think that there was definitely a business move, like a longevity move in that, not just, hey, we want to give you nice themes, but that just,
So I think, and this is a question for Raquel, is as somebody working on community for Divi, how do you make it so it's not overwhelming for a user who sees like, hey, there's all these great resources, there's everything else. Like, how do you fight that? Because I'm sure, I'm pretty sure that I'm not the only one who looks at you know, a vertical like WooCommerce or like Divi or like Genesis and goes, oh man, there's a lot of stuff here. It all looks useful, but it's super overwhelming. Like, how do you fight that, or if you're comfortable talking about that?
No, it's all good. You know, yeah, I'm not muted. Okay, cool. I think really it comes down to having the support there for them, and not by support, I don't mean necessarily, you know, the actual technical support, but groups. So Facebook groups and Slack communities, because with Divi, it's a page builder. So it's already very simple, you would think, you know, to use. But of course, there are some things that pop up. So it's actually something I do is help cultivate and curate their Facebook community. And so there's lots of Divi groups, but this one is just for support. And so that people come in all the time with simple questions. It could be anywhere from, I've seen as simple as, you know, post versus page, so very, very beginner questions, to like, you know, adding CSS to whatever, you know, to help customize it even more. But I mean, I think the first step is just, you know, a page builder is something that, you know, to somebody who's just a user, a power user, that's all that's needed really for them. It's just that, you know, we don't, you know, they're not designing from scratch and, you know, using frameworks like Genesis. So that's the first step. And then the second is to not just have that formal support, but that casual support where you could go, you know, we're all on Facebook, or we're all in Slack, so you could go and ask questions there. And the beauty of it is that we don't have the moderators in the Facebook community or other just members. So they just volunteer their time and answer each other's questions. So that's the community aspect. It's not just, it's like, you know, going to a meetup and you're able to ask questions and help each other. It's like same thing, just not IRL.
Just for the record, I'm a fan of Divi. Back in the day, you know, when I built all my things by scratch, yeah, sure. You know, I was really, you know, into hard. That's just not the case anymore. And Divi, especially pre-Gutenberg, was providing, and pre-Beaver Builder, but there's differences between those page builders. You know, we're not talking about page builders, but the Divi really does have a solid, because of that community, it's got so many resources, even just on the internet. It's got like so many different tutorial sites telling you how to do things. And, you know, for some reason, the folks in the Divi community are really good at explaining things in a way. And I think maybe it's because they're not hardcore devs, because it's almost softer, it's almost easier and more accessible, especially to users, to read those types of articles and that type of information versus, for example, you know, answers that come from WordPress folks a lot, because those tend to be really dev heavy and as opposed to user focused. And so even just that kind of the community around it not being as developer focused makes it more accessible in my experience.
No, I absolutely agree. There's something to be said about, you know, a hardcore developer and the way that persona could tend to be and the way that they communicate, and then somebody who's a user and knows some front end dev, you know, and like there's just this difference, and you know, it's hard to point and you don't want to stereotype, but there really is just like,
I totally do with them. Yeah. I actually tweeted about this. Someone was talking about, someone on Twitter was like, said a thing. They were like, I'm building a site for devs. Does anyone have any great examples of dev sites that design for devs? And I was like, so just text, you're fine. And then people were replying back. I can't remember his Twitter handle, but he replied back. He's like, I'd like to object to that stereotype, except for I just looked at my website and it's all text. So never mind. Just kidding. I mean, that's the real difference. Like the people who are using Divi or even Genesis, they're looking at their site in a different way. They're looking at their experience in a different way, and having that sub-community kind of pre-filtered is actually really helpful and really does make it more accessible.
Yeah, WP Sessions is another one that that I was looking at, mainly because of the fact that they do Word Sesh every, is it every year? I think it's pretty much every year. But their idea of they already have a community behind WP Sessions where you have all these different great teachers that are talking and doing all this stuff on there. But then they go and do this like big event where they'll hop on Zoom or Hangout or whatever, and they'll use that as a way of being able to do essentially a really long WordCamp. And so having that's another part of that community aspect of it, is that you have those great teachers that are already out there, and then you have people in the community that are like, I have something to say, and they'll give you a platform to be able to go and say it on there. So.
Yeah,
which even could be said for this show. I mean, this show we've had, last count was like 340 people, if I remember right, that have been on this show throughout the years. So yeah, no joke. Yeah.
Wow.
So we've had a decent.
I was wondering where I met all these people. I don't know, just on the internet.
And that's how they met you too.
No, seriously, that's true.
Oh, go on.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I've met people around the world that said they knew Stay because of WPwatercooler. So I'm like, Stay's my friend. That's so cool.
I'm real life. I really exist.
Yeah.
True. I'm not a CGI construct. I just, in case you were wondering, I'm sure everyone is suspect since I never go to WordCamps anymore. What were you going to say, Copper?
I was going to say, I know we only have a handful of minutes left, but there's also, interestingly, and it's been a community for a while, and a lot of people don't think about it this way, is the whole kind of business of WordPress community. So you have PressNomics, you have, that whole angle there. Before there were WooCommerce tracks, there were, full on like Sunday business tracks at particular WordCamps. I know WordCamp LA had that.
WordCamp Orange County. I think Steve may have premiered that. He would probably be like, you didn't.
No, it was
Chris
San Diego.
San Diego.
It was San Diego, 2013, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
I think we were all there.
Yep.
I've never been to WordCamp San Diego.
I think that was where Stay wasn't there, and I'm like, I'm in Southern California, and Stay's not here.
Stay's everywhere.
In your mind.
But you're right. PressNomics is definitely another a good one, which also kind of ties into a web host. So I think to make web hosts look attractive, you got to do other things other than just be a web host. Like you got to have other stuff going on as well. So having Pagely come in and be like, boom, PressNomics, here we go.
And that's really carving out. I mean, it really is like, that was such a targeted talks, targeted marketing, even like in terms of who they were trying to get to come to that, and even the price point was different in terms of, it's not like a WordCamp where it's just, $40 or $50. It was, a couple hundred, and there's a different level of activities. There's more of a focus on networking. So all of these different sub-communities really answer different needs, like within that community. And, I think what I think is really cool is how there's obviously competition, but being able to respect all of these different communities, and even like, Divi being able to respect all the stuff that's popped up around them, and, Gravity Forms, all the stuff that's popped up around them. And rather than resenting or going after those people, to encourage them to build on top of your product actually strengthens your product and strengthens that community. And so I think that's something that I think is a little more pervasive throughout the entire WordPress community versus a lot of tech, is that I feel like the supporting role of those extra communities is appreciated versus resented, in which I think that it could be in other areas.
100%. I mean, was it Drupal, I believe? Yeah, they're now targeting WordPress because of our community aspect. You're like, both open source, but what is it that separates WordPress? And that's really our community, this community of supporters.
Community of communities. We're a meta community within a community.
Definitely.
Yes.
And it's now 11:30. So I want to say thank you very much for all of you for hanging out in our little community. How about that? We post this thing all over the internet, so feel free to go take a look at it. If you're on Facebook, you'll probably see it. If you're on YouTube, you're probably seeing it. And if you're even playing video games on Twitch, no joke, we stream to Twitch, so we stream to all the stuff. So feel free to go and share any of the stuff that you find out on the internet. We really appreciate it. If you want to subscribe to this content, you can go to WPwatercooler.com/subscribe. That's where you can learn to subscribe to this stuff. And also make sure you go over to serverpress.com, makers of desktop server. They were awesome for being able to sponsor this particular episode. We really appreciate it. Talk to y'all later. Bye.